All right, folks. Well, it looks like old Volodymyr Zelensky is in town to whip up some support for another, I think, $61 billion in money for his government to continue to fight the war against Russia. And while Republicans have been pretty awful and have shown a lot of support financially for Ukraine, even though it has nothing to do with us, and also the U.S. has obstructed the peace process. The war would have been over a long time ago had the U.S. not basically forced Zelensky to continue fighting the war, and he was dumb enough, although perhaps he felt like he would be probably killed if he didn't go along with it, to continue the war and not make peace with Russia. Now he's so far down the line, he knows any compromise with Russia at this point. Russia's holding most of the cards. It's not going to look good for him, and so he kind of, I think, trying to empathize somewhat with the guy. He feels like he has no choice. He's made his bed, and he's lying down in it. But better late than never. Republicans, a decent amount of them, enough of them, have sort of woken up to the fact that this is a fool's errand, if nothing else. Leave aside all this stuff. Oh, is this our business? Is Zelensky even the good guy in this fight? Leave all that aside, because objectively, it's a loser. He's losing. His country's losing. It's a big fat waste of money. And we're spending billions and billions of dollars to defend Ukraine's border when we can't even defend our own. And I think that's about the most mild criticism that you could make of funding the Ukraine war, because it's a border war. It's trying to maintain the integrity of Ukraine's border when the U.S. border lacks much, if any, integrity on its own. And so, even though it's a pretty tepid reason for opposing the war, it's opposition nonetheless, and I will take it. And it's something that should be common sense to every single Republican voter. We need to protect our own borders before we even discuss protecting the borders of another country. Now, unfortunately, Republicans are not going that far. They're not saying, okay, to even consider Ukraine funding. In order for us to even, have the argument, hear the argument, we need to secure our border first. They're not going that far. They're saying, okay, let's have a compromise deal. Democrats, you want your war in Ukraine. We Republicans, we want you want to secure Ukraine's border. We want to secure our border. Let's have a bill that does both. Now, do I like that? Would I even vote for it if I were in Congress? Probably not. But, again, securing the U.S. border, if it's, a real bill that actually does that, I don't think the Democrats would go along with it anyway. And so at this point, the Democrats are not going along with it. Joe Biden's not going to sign it. And so that just means that there's going to be no more bills supporting Ukraine going through the U.S. Congress as long as the Republicans hold out. The new Speaker of the House, not a fan of the guy, but he is at least seems to be maintaining his position on this. There's a lot of people in the Senate maintaining their position on this. And so Zelensky's being brought in because the Democrats don't want to argue about this. The Democrats do not want to move on this position. They just want to shame the Republicans and make them feel bad and have Zelensky say to their face that, you are sentencing my country to death. If you don't give me more money, Putin win. You hate Putin, yes? I no like Putin. I anti-Putin. And if you no give me money, you Putin puppet. And thankfully, people are no longer afraid of that. Just like, the term racist. All these terms that they come up with, Putin puppet, racist, Nazi. Remember when they used to call people sexists? Oh my gosh, that was so quaint back then. They were just calling us sexists. Eventually, people don't care about the term anymore. It loses its weight. And now people don't care about being called a Putin puppet as much as they used to. And so it's not working for old Zelensky. Hell, you even have Elon Musk turning pretty heavily on Zelensky because he's taken up the cause of Gonzalo Lira. I mean, I should do an entire video just about that. But I kind of missed it at the time because Tucker, I guess, put up a show about it on Saturday. And Elon saw it and he said, "Who's this Gonzalo guy? I've never heard of him." Which, I mean, that's pretty great to see. So, I mean, you've got Musk shaming Zelensky over the persecution of an American, Gonzalo Lira, on Twitter. An American who has been left to die in a Ukrainian gulag by this administration. The Chilean government, where he also holds citizenship, they seem much more concerned, but, Chile doesn't have any power. I mean, if the United States won't save one of their own citizens, Chile is not going to be able to save them, because without a doubt, the Ukrainians would have run the idea by the United States first, since the U.S. is controlling Ukraine. The U.S. military deeply embedded with the Ukrainian security state. And so I wouldn't be surprised if it was an American military advisor who gave the order to the Ukrainians to pick up Gonzalo and torture him, potentially to death. But either way, they wanted to silence him because he is an enemy of both the regime in Kiev and, of course, by extension, the regime in Washington. And it's a lot easier for the U.S. government to persecute you, to torture you, to violate your human rights when you step outside of the United States, when you're off American soil. That's why, there were these CIA black sites all around the world where the CIA would take people in order to torture them. That's what, Hosni Mubarak was good for back in the day. The CIA could drop off problematic prisoners in Egypt. The Egyptians would torture them on behalf of the CIA. And then once they extracted whatever confessions they were looking for, they'd pick the people back up and then probably dump their bodies in the ocean or something. So what's Zelensky's big threat? What does Zelensky have to hold over these Republican politicians, since they don't care about being called Putin puppets as much as they used to, and there's a new war that they can use to satiate the hunger of the military-industrial complex in Israel, and that's a much more popular cause. American people in general, to the extent that they cared about Ukraine to begin with, have soured on it by now. But Israel's still fresh, and you can get a lot of support for Israel, particularly on the right. And so the Republicans much more interested in fighting a war there, especially now you have Netanyahu asking for American peacekeepers to come in. Oh, well, yes, of course, we want a ceasefire with Hamas now, but we need American peacekeepers to come in and, keep the peace. Certainly Netanyahu's not trying to drag America into the war by putting American soldiers in harm's way, literally using Americans as human shields, putting them in between Hamas and the IDF, hoping that Hamas would end up killing a couple Americans, and then America going, that's the final straw, now we're in this too. I think there's a lot of American warmongers who are much more intrigued by that idea than they are of continuing this fruitless Ukraine war. So anyway, what I originally was saying, the point that I was trying to make, Zelensky's leverage. He's threatening to draft men over the age of 40, his own citizens. He wants to take all the grandpas of Ukraine and draft them and put them into the military, put them at the front lines. You're going to have a bunch of geriatrics, manning machine gun crews, as if this is some kind of, threat that Americans should care about. Let me tell you something, Mr. Zelensky, when you get to the point to where you're having to draft old men into your armed forces just to feed the meat grinder, I think your meat has been ground. I think it's over. That is last-ditch stuff. That's like, the final weeks of World War II Germany stuff. It's like the Russians are at the gates of Berlin. Quick, let's assemble the Volkssturm and arm the World War I veterans, who are in their 40s, with their old World War I rifles. That appears to be the state of the Ukraine war, according to Zelensky, based on what Zelensky is saying. He's saying, if you don't give me this money, Putin wins. And, if that's the case, well, at least the bloodshed will be over. I said before the war started, I didn't think that Putin would invade, because I thought that he was a pretty smart guy, and I didn't think it was the right decision. Even after he invaded, I still think it was probably best that he not invade and not go ahead with it, because I think the costs outweigh the benefits. And considering how long this has drug on, I think that it was probably still the right call. But nonetheless, I think that Putin will be happy to take the win, and he fully intends to stick it out. After all, he went into Ukraine because it was popular within Russia to support the separatist cause in the Donbass, because those are Russian people, and the people of Russia felt that it was in their national interest to protect Russians outside of Russia on Russia's borders. And as far as I know, that is still the case. People still feel that way. I mean, imagine if there was a state in Mexico on their northern border that, let's say, bordered Texas or Arizona, that was mostly populated by English speakers who culturally were more aligned with the United States, and who were being who were under assault from the federal government in Mexico City. You can bet that the United States would invade Mexico in defense of those people. In fact, I meant this as a purely hypothetical, but that's actually what happened. Oh my gosh, that was the intervention in Texas. There was a breakaway American republic called Texas. It was a bunch of Americans in Mexico who were being oppressed by the Central Mexican government, which, I believe was an overt dictatorship at the time. Although I might have my dates wrong a little bit, because I'm not an expert on Mexican history. But anyway, the Americans invaded on behalf of Texas. Texas became a part of the United States, and so did a whole bunch of other sections of northern Mexico. That's essentially what we're seeing here in the case of Russia and Ukraine. You can imagine how popular the intervention on behalf of Texas would have been back when James K. Polk declared war against Mexico. And so that is the situation for Russia. That's why they're not going to quit. I don't ultimately know what Russia's plans would be, what they want. Maybe they will overstep. Maybe they will get themselves into an even deeper quagmire than they're currently in. In victory, maybe they'll bite off more than they can chew. Who knows? But what I do know is that they will be the ones to determine that, not the United States. Russia has the means and the motive. The United States theoretically has the means, but we completely lack any motive, other than just raw imperial power, which is not a motive that is shared by many people outside of Washington, D.C. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.